Hi, this is Robert Clotworthy, and you are listening to Oak Island Plus, a discussion of Oak Island and other mysteries from around the world. Here are your hosts, James McQuiston, Oak Island theorist and author, along with John Hamels, PhD and historical researcher. Get the whole story right here, brought to you by Rabbit Hole Investigations.
Hey everybody, welcome back to Oak Island Plus. This is episode number 8, and I'm Doc Hamels and
Jim McQuiston.
Jim, what are we going to talk about today? We got a lot to talk about today.
Yes, this show is jam-packed, and a lot of shows do like a year in review. We're doing a yearly update, which means we have new data on every one of our shows. And you may not be able to comprehend it all the first time through, so you may have to watch it twice, or you can stop your screen and take a better look at each slide. But we're not kidding you, it's jam-packed. And I was going to just tell how we got here, because that was the first show.
That's a good question. How did we get here? Sometimes I ask myself that question.
He even asked me why we are here. But so I was working with Oak Island from 2016, and I wrote 10 books on it, and I was up there several times. I was on the History Channel 14 times. About 4 books ago, I had been on Doc's weekly show a number of times, and about 4 books ago, I started asking him for help, and he helped with the last 4 books, particularly the last one, which was the Masonic Conspiracy book. We spent a lot of time on that. So we decided that the book is nice, and it holds it for posterity, but you have to wait so long to get them published that new things happen. And we wanted a vehicle for how we could get the new stuff we were finding as we went down our rabbit holes.
You know, I don't think people realize that for researchers, it never stops.
Yeah.
It's just like digging that hole that you see on Oak Island. They just keep going and going until eventually you end. But for us, you know, we started on episode 1, and the stuff that we've learned since then it's pretty incredible stuff.
Yeah. So that's how we got going, and we decided, well, we joined up with this wonderful organization here, and
Lakeshore Center for the Arts.
Yeah, and Randy's been helping us out with the camera.
Randy Burt, the man back there.
So basically, the bottom line is we just thought we could be more up to date.
Right.
We're actually literally more up to date than the Curse of Oak Island, because they film all summer, show it in the winter and the fall, where we film it once a month as we're finding things. And it's been really growing, and I think Doc has some stats on it.
Yeah, you know, Jim, I got to be honest with you. When we first talked about doing a video podcast, first of all, I'd never done one. And even though I've done TV shows and produced those things, but this is a little different format. And, you know, we were excited when we got, I don't know, like a couple hundred views, you know, on our first episode. And how do I say this in the way I really feel? I feel that your research has been validated, and the research that you and I have done together has been even more validated, because on our video podcast, Oak Island Plus, we have 472 subscribers.
Thank you, folks.
And that's for those that push that little subscribe button. It doesn't cost anything, okay? And we encourage you to do that, because that helps us out with the statistics on YouTube and puts us in different categories. And I don't have a drum roll, but I mean, I'm still in shock when I put together daily how many views that we've had on the first 7 episodes. And Randy's sitting down so he won't fall over. 14,330 as of today. I mean, what? Over 14,000 views, and by the time this airs, we're going to be hitting 15,000 easily.
And we know that that's only a view per IP address. So if there's they usually say 2.5 people per household, that's potentially 30,000, 40,000, you know.
So I'm tickled. I don't know about you, but I mean, the fact that what we're talking about, people find important enough to sit down and watch. Okay?
And we get a lot of comments, and one thing that Doc does, he sends me these stats about once a week or once every other week, and he started doing a pie chart of the shows, and so you can see that our biggest show ever was with Ark Art Guinness up in Nova Scotia.
He claims it's his good looks.
Yeah,
I think it's the sunglasses myself.
But it was on the wells and roads
Right.
made of stone, not on Oak Island, but surrounding Oak Island, and how they were similar to the ones on Oak Island. Because our basic theory is that this is a bigger story than Oak Island. Not that Oak Island isn't important, but this whole area was being settled by basically Knights of Nova Scotia, and potentially the Knights of Malta, which that's a show for another day. But you can see Arts is the biggest show. Our introductory show is the next biggest show, etc. You can look at the graph if you care to, but again, the numbers don't lie. We don't have a single data point that's going down.
Right, all of our graphs
You
are
know,
slowly
so-
going up, and I think some people binge watch, to tell you the truth.
Yeah.
You know, we'll start out in episode 1, and I kind of watch the numbers throughout the day, and that's really cool. And we've been so fortunate to have so many positive comments that we've made history interesting again, and especially for those folks from Nova Scotia. I mean, this is your history that we're exploring, and we try to respect it and honor it, and pleased to do so.
And we've gotten dozens of comments, and we try to answer them on YouTube, when we can. But one that has come up consistently is, what was this treasure that we're always talking about, or what was in that
Well,
treasure?
I'd like to do a shout out to Maria. She was on our Facebook page, and she's really the one that pushed this hard. She wanted to know, what was the treasure? And when we say treasure, what do we mean by the treasure, Jim?
Well, I've printed it in a number of my books, but what it is there was this gentleman named George Keith, who was the Earl Marshal of all of Scotland, and it was a hereditary position, so their family had one way or the other, by hook or crook, got a lot of money and a lot of jewels.
So generational.
Points. Yes. And he was robbed by one of my main Oak Island suspects, Al Strachan, in October of 1622. And the list appears in at least 3 contemporary places. One is a book on Freemasons, one is the King's Privy Council minutes, and the other is the actual court case. And they all match, reasonably match. I think they just copied each other. But so this isn't something new that somebody came up with. This is stuff in the old documents as far back as the 1600s. And, I used a currency calculator, and they're a little bit difficult because they give you a different, are you comparing wages? Are you comparing land values, price of gold,
Right.
etc.? But I added this up, and I came up with it could be worth as much as $1 billion. Somebody else, who I didn't even know was working on it, added it up, and he came up with $3 to $4 billion.
Wow, this is huge.
So even if it's $500 million, it's a lot of money. And I talked to the Society of Antiquaries that I'm a member of. I talked to the Scottish National Museums and the Scottish National Records, and nobody knows where the bulk of this treasure went.
So you feel that some of this perhaps came to Nova Scotia?
Well, Al Strachan was a partner to William Alexander, who was
Right.
given Nova Scotia, and we absolutely know that he financed some of it because he purchased a ship to go over there. Him and 2 other guys, they signed a document, which we have their signature on, and then he became a Knight Baronet, which cost a little bit of money to do that, too.
And we found some of his silverware just off of Oak Island, right?
Yeah, that's a
Shipwreck.
whole new story and a whole new...
So we know the Strachans were in that area.
Oh, yeah, and then 200 years later, John Strachan owns the Nolan Cross lots. So there's so many circles that are can't be coincidence. If you had 1 or 2 or 3 or 4, yeah, you get 100 or 200 or 300 or 400. Pretty soon you go, this has to be the story.
Right.
And we're pretty firm believers in it. Most of this originally was in my books, or a lot of it was, but not very much actually made the Curse of Oak Island, in spite of the fact that they've used 14 snippets of me. They use the high-level stuff, but they don't get into the weeds on
So
it.
Maria, this chart is for you and all the others that have been wondering what Jim's been talking about. Jim, why don't we just touch on some of the categories of what was in the treasure that was stolen? I mean, this is unbelievable.
Yeah, and the first thing they listed was kind of unique because it's Portugal ducats, which is a coin.
Oh.
And that was there with other foreign coins.
So this is how perhaps some Portuguese coins could have made it to Nova Scotia.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And this was to the avail of 26,000 pounds.
Woo.
Now, those were Scottish pounds at the time, which were worth less than an English pound. So I had to convert Scottish pounds to English pounds back in 1622, then take English pounds up to now. That's
Yeah.
But that wasn't the only big bundle. There was also, way down at the bottom, you see 16,000 merks of silver and gold ready to coin, which was within a green coffer.
Ooh.
Now, a coffer is just a treasure chest.
Okay.
They used to actually call them coffins, too.
Okay.
If it was green, it could have been patina, like brass or copper, or it might have just been a wooden box painted, but regardless. And the other one that's interesting, two of them, one was a pair of gold bracelets. Well, we know they found, I believe, 3 links of gold from a bracelet or something in there. And then there were 36 dozen gold buttons, and we know that Gary found 1 gold-plated button
That's right.
that they got out of the spoils from the money pit. But one of them that's really intriguing is that the last item was the title deeds for, he owned 30 castles. They said he could sleep anywhere in Scotland and be at home.
Wow.
And they stole the title deeds. Well, these deeds were so important, and they didn't know if the castle would sell for 400 or 500 years into some other family. So they would write them on parchment, which we know parchment was found down there, in India ink. We know India ink was on that parchment. Then they'd wrap them in canvas and soak them in candle wax 3 times
Right.
to waterproof them. Well, one scenario is that it's lying there at the bottom of the money pit, one of these deeds, the drill comes down, punctures it, comes up fast enough for the ink not to smear.
Yeah.
But when they found the recent parchment a couple years ago, it was all smeared purple. And anybody that's ever worked with India ink when you were a kid or whatever, when it smears thin, it's purple.
Yeah.
It's not black like it looks like when you're writing with it. Anyway, so there's some interesting things in this treasure that could well have been in the money pit or on the island somewhere. And so we just wanted to, we're not going to read them all, but if you want to know what was in it, you can slow this down when you're watching it the next time, and you can read every item that's in there. Oh, and there was one other item that was a Queen of Denmark's picture. She had married James the First of England.
Oh.
And it was her picture in gold, set about with diamonds. Well, this item was found in a gentleman's will that was part of this whole Masonic conspiracy that we're always talking about. And there's one other part where some jewels were found, and I'm going to talk about that later on.
All right, so just to boil this down real quick, Al Strachan steals this from George Keith. Here's the list, and we know that he was accused of robbery, and the next thing you know, he's a knight baronet and a partner to William Alexander, who founded Nova Scotia. Right. So that's it in a nutshell. So this guy had a lot of loot, and he could invest in this project. So we better keep going here. We'll never get it done, huh?
Yeah.
What's next?
So the next slide, or the next show, was with Art Guinness from Nova Scotia. And how this all came about was he loved to hike and loved to take photos. So he was out, he watched Oak Island, he saw the walls and the roads and stuff, and he's like, wow, I see these things when I'm out hiking. So he started making records of them and sending them to us. And we had the biggest show we've had so far. We talked a lot about it. And so what the slide is here that you see, this is at a place called Port Medway, and it's down from Oak Island a little bit. But what's significant about it is that Medway really was a contortion of the word Malta or Maltese. That was originally named Port Malta. Well, who would name that? They would have to be the Knights of Malta.
Which was a branch of
Templars. Well, they took over all the Templar treasures and possessions. So that's why we're going to work on this Knight of Malta project next year.
So what are these pictures here, real quick? Do we know what they are?
If in the other show, you'll remember where he showed us a wall that looked like an M.
Right.
And we thought maybe that was for Malta.
Indeed.
It was not in an area where you would have removed the stones for agriculture.
Right.
It looked
was
over
purposeful.
the fort, like a fort. So he went and got a LiDAR map to see what else he could find. He went out there and he found walls 2 and 3 that you see on the LiDAR map there.
I see.
And number 3 is that really nice wall right there in
Wow.
the top center. And then he found the road. And what's interesting about that road is our last show, Carmen Legg told us that the stone road in the swamp on Oak Island was not stone. It was covered with sod because the oxen could
Right.
not walk.
Had a stone base
on
with
it
sod on
safely.
top, right? Yeah.
Right. And that's what this road is. It's a stone road with sod on top of it.
Wow.
It's not the only one he found, but it was cool that he
Good
found
example.
it along the LiDAR here. Then he got a couple bonuses because he didn't see these on there, but the center bottom is actually one of 3 foundations he found there. And he found a really cool well.
Looks very similar to the one on Oak Island.
And all of this is in the middle of nowhere. There's no farms around or anything. So his words to me were, something went on there. And it had to, you know. So he's working there and he's working at New Ross, which is connected to Oak Island. It's right above Oak Island, and there's a lot of historical connections. So next year sometime, we have to set some things up. But we're going to do another Zoom like we did with Carmen.
Okay.
But we're going to do us.
So let's leave a teaser out there.
And
So
Art.
New Ross, you feel is who settled in? The Knights Baronet, right?
Right. William Alexander had an estate there,
Yeah.
according to the Alexander family, and
And this is how far from Oak Island? Not very far. right?
about 17 miles up the hill.
Okay.
And there's a mysterious foundation up there and a well. So Art came up with this idea, well, maybe we could link up. There's 2 other people that would help the cause.
Oh, another Zoom meeting.
Yeah, and so we're working with them to see which one wants to do it and which one can meet the schedule and all that. But our goal is to have the 2 of us and Art on a Zoom with this mystery guest,
Okay.
specifically talking about the walls and roads and wells around New Ross. What else has been discovered there?
Okay.
So that's going to be next year sometime. We're not exactly sure.
Okay.
So then we did this show. It's kind of a fun show because it was about William Alexander, right?
I don't know. I wasn't here.
That's right, you weren't.
Right.
So Doc was dressed as William Alexander.
Yes, I was.
Looked very elegant and everything.
Elegant,
And
distinguished.
he talked in the old,
I talked in some accent. I don't know what it was.
I think it was Swedish. But so we discovered something since that show. We knew that Alexander had connections back to the Templars. And then we knew that he established the Knights Baronet, and then his sons became the first Freemasons along with his partner. But what we didn't know, we added on to that, is that his granddaughter ended up marrying the Lord Torphican is his name, who was descended from the very first guy that gave the Templar treasure to Mary Queen of Scots. So this story went totally around the circle. And so on the left-hand side of the slide, you see William Jr. He led the Knights Baronet in Nova Scotia. He's presumably the very first Freemason.
1634.
Yes, and he
Way back
married
then.
Margaret Douglas. Well, who
Douglas.
is she? She was the daughter of Al Strachan's partner in the robbery. So that means that Alexander knew about the robbery,
Absolutely.
may have even condoned it. We don't
Absolutely.
know. But you're going to let your daughter, your granddaughter, marry the daughter, or your son marry the
Yeah.
daughter of a. So it's just like all I can think of are the words "the fix was in." The fix was in, and I believe it went all the way up to James the First. I believe James I and Alexander and Strachan got together, and William Douglas, and they said, "Wow."
And going back, we knew the king was strapped for money.
Yep.
They were trying to raise funds for their armies because they're constantly battling. William Alexander wanted to get out of Dodge and form a utopia, and Nova Scotia was it. And so they were funding this through a variety of projects, and Al Strachan stole all this stuff.
Yep.
Easy peasy.
Yeah. So, maybe there needs to be more proof, but again, you go around a big circle like that, and
It's all the same names and players.
And then his 2 brothers, there were a lot of kids, but 2 of his brothers, Anthony was the general surveyor of Scotland, so we know that Scotland was surveyed in 1623 because the map came out in 1624. And who would you send over there except the General Surveyor of Scotland? Send him over to survey it. And then another brother was the 7th Freemason, and he took over the lodge in Edinburgh. He joined in 1638, took it over in 1639, but he left that year, and he went down to London where his dad was living. And I think the reason he went was his grandfather died in 39 and his father died in 40. So I think he wanted to be down there with him. But what's really interesting, which we only found out recently, is that their neighbor was a man named Anthony Sayer, and he was the very first Grand Master of any Grand Lodge in history. And 6-minute walk from the Alexander's house was the lodge where the first meeting was held to plan the Grand Lodge of England. So you can't tell me that Henry Alexander, who just left as the leader of the Edinburgh Lodge, didn't have some effect on the Apple Tree Lodge that was only 6 minutes from his house.
And then, and if we just put this all in reverse order, all of these players, every one of them, I think, just about, have links to Knights Templar.
Yeah.
So when we talk about Knights Templar on Oak Island, or the Knights of Malta, or whatever, well, yeah, there's connections. Now, whether they were actually on that island doing certain things, but at least it's multi-generational.
Multi-generational. And so this next slide, we had talked about the 45th parallel versus the 48th. And I had it in my mind that Alexander's deed actually ended at the 45th because New England ended at the 45th. What I found out was much more tricky.
Right.
It always is. But if you look at this map that's on the screen here, down at the bottom in the center you see the number 1. Well, his deed for Nova Scotia was distinguished more by description than by actual latitudes.
Okay.
So it went from there over to the St. Lawrence, where I have the number 2 there, St. Lawrence River.
Okay.
Went up to the top, but that's the Gasp Peninsula up there. And they said in the deed, no, they didn't say it in the deed, but I looked that up, and that's just above the 48th, just above the 50th, actually. And right, that little island next to it is called Anticosti, and Doc found a map that showed that the Knights Baronet had land on Anticosti. So it just looks like he was trying to expand his dominion as wide as he could make it.
And this was all new information to us, right?
Yes.
We thought everything stopped at the 45th.
Well, then it came down, and this is the thing on the deed that throws everybody off, because it says comes down to Cape Breton Island, which is at about the 45th. Well, it isn't. It's a little higher than that, but that is the latitude that's written in his deed, is the 45th.
Right.
So, because what we noticed was Oak Island, New Ross, and his bigger community of Port Royal were all just a hair below the 45th.
Exactly.
Like they were trying to protect themselves legally by not slopping over that. So that is where that 45th came from. And actually, while that's on the screen there, I'm just going to look real quick at my notes on. So in the first charter of Virginia, which is the first one that mentions anything, it says it'll be between 4 and 30, which 34 degrees from the equatorial line.
Okay.
Up to 45, which is what we were working with. We were working with a figure of 45.
And these were all connected, the Virginia colonies in Nova Scotia, then, right?
And in that deed, they made a provision for other towns, including the town of Plymouth, England, to settle what would be called maybe North Virginia. And that would start at the same place, and it would also go to the 45th. So now we have 45 written in 2 deeds. Well, when they made the actual New England deed, they expanded it to 48.
Okay.
So even though William Alexander's deed does not say he gets to go to the 48th, he went by the Plymouth Colony deed and basically took
superseded it. Yeah.
So that's how that came about. So the 45th is really the only one that's mentioned in all these deeds, but it ended up going up to the 48th. So we thought it was important to, and you can see most people don't know that Nova Scotia extended all the way over to the St. Lawrence River. It's gigantic compared to what it is today.
And the Knights Baronet own properties in this area?
Yep. That map that you found It's funny because he found this map, sent it to me, and it says Baronets.
Yep, the Baronets.
So I wrote the place it came from, and they didn't know a whole lot about it. So one or the other of us found a book that told the general location, like Cape Breton or whatever. And so I went through and checked everybody on the list with all the drawings on the thing, and they came out to within one or two of the numbers. Like if there were 18 in this area, there'd be listed 18 here. So we have possibly the best record of this, that someday we're going to actually place the names where the lots were. And it went all the way up to Anacostia Island.
So to summarize this, the Knights Baronet were all over the place.
Oh, yeah.
And they're all part of the story that we're telling about Nova Scotia and Scotland and how they settled this. And it's far broader than what we realized as far as the landmass.
So our next show was about the 90-foot stone and about Mary Queen of Scots.
Her codex, or cipher.
Yeah, cipher. And in just to jump back to Keith, he stole the treasure in 22 along with Al Strachan stole it along with William Douglas and a few other people, but one of those people was James Keith, the actual son of the man they robbed. So in 23, Keith dies, and Strachan and Mrs. Keith get married.
Wait a minute, he marries the widow?
Of the guy he robbed, yeah. And James, this James Keith, he's the youngest son, they give him one of the castles. So in 1654, which would be about not quite a generation later, a treasure chest shows up out on the Orkney Islands, sent there by James Keith.
Now, for those who are listening, where are the Orkneys?
They're right up at the very top, just off the shore of Scotland.
So up in the northern tip,
Yeah,
up in there.
yeah.
Okay.
And it shows up there, and it's addressed to William Douglas, who was at the time the secretary, or the treasurer, the Lord High Treasurer.
Right up there.
And so the government took it, and they put together a committee, and they had it witnessed when they opened it, and then it was all sent to the government. So Mr. Douglas never got his little bit of treasure from James Keith. But it's the same people involved, the James Keith and William Douglas. So while we were working on Oak Island, a Masonic Conspiracy, I had already found the name of Thomas Howard on the stone. But this other area was bugging us because it was ambiguous what that symbol meant. And I went back to, I have 104 cipher sheets, and every one of them has 100 ciphers on it, so it takes hours and days. I went back and I found out that that other cipher that was ambiguous actually turned out to be the Lord High Treasurer of Scotland. And that is William Douglas.
So these guys were all on the 90-foot stone, according to the Mary Queen of Scots cipher, or code.
Douglas, the Lord High Treasurer, was there, and Thomas Howard, who was the Grand Master of Masons, were both on that stone. So now this whole story's gone so full circle again. I keep saying that, but you know, it's going along. Oh yeah, this is cool. This is cool. Oh my, bingo! There it is, right there. You know. So, in keeping with the marks, there was a lot of discussion about Mason marks, and everybody used marks back then. If you were a printer, those bag seals they've been finding, they had marks on them because a lot of people couldn't read and write. That's basically the thing, but also I think it made them feel fancy. So we took a look at the first three non-operative Masons, which today would be called a Freemason, and what happened, I was talking to a group of Freemasons, and I'd made the comment that the middle one, that's Anthony Alexander at the top, I said, he must have been lazy, just put 3 X's there. Well, after my talk, this Masonic historian comes up and he says, you look closer at that, that's not 3 X's, that's 2 compasses over a T-square, which are the symbols, main symbols of...
Compass and square?
So I just replaced the lines with 2 compasses and a T-square, and yep, came out. So I thought, well, what about William Alexander then? He has kind of a crazy mark. So all I did was get his signature out of the way and take that L off the top, and it comes out, looks like 2 X's, but it's 1.
Yeah.
compass over a square. So for the first guy, you have one compass. For the second guy, you have two compasses. Al Strachan's, the third guy, he's using a mark that he's been using for years. We found it way back on a 1625 deed. And it looks very much like the Sacred Heart of Jesus symbol. I put one right underneath the other.
Yeah.
But thing of it is that off the coast of Oak Island, within sight of it, is a shipwreck that was dove on in the 70s. And the gentleman that dove on it pulled up some silverware.
That's what I was talking about, right?
Yeah. On the handle of the silverware was a stag, Highland stag, with 3 chevrons under it. Well, chevrons just a expanded triangle type thing. And we found that it was common on Freemason graves to put a chevron with a compass in it, chiseled right into the gravestone. So you can see that I put 3 chevrons under a drawing of a deer, and inside of them I put the 3 compasses. So now you would have 3 compasses. You'd have 1 for the first guy, 2 for the second guy, 3 for the third guy. But Doc went and found on Al Strachan's castle, Castle Thornton in Scotland, there was a stone carving. And if you look at it, it says SAS. Well, the S was for Sir, and a lot of the knights did that. They put S in front of their name so people would know they were a knight. So that stands for Sir Alexander Strachan. But if you look at the A, it's not a typical A.
It's not typical.
It's a compass with a square again.
All right.
So we have Masonic symbology in these signatures, and it's just a cool thing to figure out.
Right.
So the next show that we did was on this 1634 painting that I found, and that's the first book that Doc helped me with, and we picked that thing apart. It's called Oak Island and New Ross. Yeah. And so we found a lot of symbology in the painting, and there was one area. I'll let you talk about that.
Right. So we looked at the various vignettes, and we figured out this was paying homage to various Gordon and the Strachans and so forth, and that was on the painting, and it was on your, let's see, what side would it be if they're looking at it? On their left side, right? Along the left side of the painting. And then at the top, they got the ships that you counted and figured that was how many ships that,
17.
17 ships that were sent over to Nova Scotia over time. And then on the right side, it's kind of faded. And so we posed the question to our viewers, well, we're stumped. We have no idea what this is. And so this is a shout out to Belinda, who's actually a descendant of Sir William Alexander.
Yeah.
And she proposed that it looked like there were some birds in there. And so originally I started looking, and I could kind of see shapes of birds, and I thought, well, okay, because it's pretty faded, and birds were pretty popular. So I just thought, all right, maybe it's a bird. But then, for whatever reason, one day I was looking at the map be on the left side there, and I was looking for various parts of Scotland, and I looked at those little islands in the top, left corner there, very at the top, and it's just this little string. And I looked at it and I go, holy mackerel, I've seen that somewhere before. And I said, no way. So then I pulled out the painting, did a close-up, and that's in the middle. And you'll see in the top left corner there, this little string of little squares and dots and so forth. And I said to Jim, I think these are the islands off of Scotland, and then you take it from there because you superimposed the map.
Well, I luckily got an outline map of that area, and all I did was size it to the painting map, and on the right you can see how well it fit. So we solved that mystery. It was actually a drawing of what you'd call the Western Isles, or the islands between Ireland and England and Scotland.
I think there still could be possibly birds that could have been painted on top of that. We don't know. So, but at least we know the background now were those isles, and it fits right in there. And this was painted in miniature by Norgate, right?
Yeah.
And that was representing where King Charles was handing over the patent to Nova Scotia to Sir William Alexander. So that's part of that painting. So if you all want to go back to that show, that would be show whatever 4 was it, that talks about the painting.
Show 5.
Show 5. Okay.
Yeah. And one other thing that we were just talking about one day, and this happened to be on the painting too. On the left was the coat of arms that Charles was given to William Alexander that day. And at the top you'll see a beaver, and that's the first time and possibly the only time that a beaver has ever been used on an official coat of arms. Because you have to really follow stringent rules on a coat of arms. But Doc came across the current one, and so we were comparing, well, you have a Native American on both of them with a spear in her hand, but now you swapped out the mermaid for a unicorn. But what really came out interesting on this, I had a book called Oak Island and the Mayflower, because I showed how people from the Mayflower and the Plymouth colony moved up to Oak Island. They were the earliest settlers and treasure hunters. And lo and behold, the flowers on the bottom of the current coat of arms of Nova Scotia are Mayflowers.
You're welcome.
Another circle.
And you see, this is what we do all the time. And I always kind of laugh about this because people say, you guys must get together. We don't get together. We text each other and send each other messages. And so I happened to look at the description of the current coat of arms for Nova Scotia, and there it was. And we talked a little bit about that X also, which actually is the cross of St. Andrew, right?
Yes.
And that goes back to the Knights Templar, I believe. Right?
Yeah.
And the Knights Hospitallers and all that group with that blue X.
It was actually started to be used even before the
Before that?
Royal Orders.
Okay.
And then people would adopt it on their flags or on his coat of arms. So that was a good find too. It's just crazy how we're just bringing all these little details together to build this picture better and better all the time. So we've been hearing this year the term multi-generational conspiracy, which my last book was called The Masonic Conspiracy. But what most people don't know, because most of my War Room meetings were never shown, out of the 6 live ones I did, and a couple of Zooms, they've only shown parts of 3 of them. There've been 14 parts shown, but they didn't get into the other ones. But since the very beginning, my first War Room was 2017, 2018, 2019, by Zoom in 2020, and in the War Room again in 2021, I have talked about this multi-generational solution. And you can see, just for graphics here, I have a Knights Templar that's supposed to be Jacques de Molay.
Oh, yeah.
And then
the Grandmaster.
Big symbol, Masonic symbol, and then hanging off it is the Knights Baronet.
It's all connected.
And I've done 3 talks now with Masonic lodges and presented this idea, and all 3 of them loved it and said, yeah, I think you're really on to something. Because it's been a mystery. What was the link between these 2? What was the link between the Templars and the Masons? Well, it was the Knights Baronet, and we've got a lot of evidence of that. Show for a different day again. So, but the other thing is, when I was up there in 2018, we actually had 2 meetings, because the second meeting was impromptu, and it involved this medallion that was found up at New Ross. And Doug and I were working on this off to the side, and it's shown here in the middle of this photo, and it's from 1671. Well, I tracked down, there were only 3 of them made that year, and one of them got melded in a robbery. It was melded with a bunch of other items. The other one is in the British Museum. So and they know who those 2 belong to, so the only person this one could belong to was none other than Christopher Monk, the guy that financed Sir William Phipps. And the thing about it was that Monk had a little falling out with the king, and he said, I don't want any more of my titles. I don't want my knighthoods or anything. I'm rich enough, I'm just going on my own. So he has that medallion there doing nothing. Well, here comes William Phipps with, in today's money, millions of dollars that he split between who? King James II and Christopher Monk. So they're the main benefactors of it.
Phipps is this treasure hunter, right?
Yeah.
He's the Concepcion and going around all over the place looking for booty and treasure, sunken treasure and so forth. Yeah.
So this other full circle thing that I've come up with was that two of the oldest surviving firearms in Scotland were made by a man named Andrew Philp, Philp. And one is a pistol from 1620 and another is a long rifle from 1635. And Andrew's name is given as both Philp and Philip. And that's exactly the way the name of James Philp, or Philip, was given, and he was an employee of William Alexander. And when Alexander died in 1640, Philp sold his land and moved to America. Well, his name was James Philp. James Phipps shows up in Maine just a few years later. And he was also a gun maker. And I believe he was the father of William Phipps. And I think that's how Phipps found that there was some type of treasure up around Oak Island or New Ross, that area. And when it was interesting that when James Phipps' wife died, she remarried and she gave her maiden name as Philip. Not Phipps, but Philip, just like James Philp and Andrew Philp.
Right. They did that in those days.
Yeah. So when they make a deal about Phipps coming up to Nova Scotia, and we know he did. He went up there with 700 men. But he wrote right in his book that they were constantly searching for plunder, that was his word, which is stolen treasure, by land, on water, and, quote, underground. So they were there as treasure hunters. They weren't there burying a treasure.
As depositors.
They were there looking for the treasure.
So he could have been digging there, right?
Yeah, and I think he lost his medallion at New Ross.
Wow.
Possibly in some kind of skirmish. And because it was only underground a little bit when they found it a couple hundred years later. It was down only 3 inches or so. And I'm going to zero in on that medallion here on the screen for you, because I want to just show you that the bottom part of it, from the dragon down, is semi-smashed right there compared to the rest of it. It's not as crisp. And so one theory or scenario is he was wearing it around his neck like they were required to do that. The knights wore it around their neck. He got in a skirmish with either the French or the Mi'kmaq. Somebody took a tomahawk or a rifle butt or something, hit him right there, dented the silver, because this is made out of silver. It popped off the chain, went down in the ground, and he's running for his life. And it laid there till 1970 something. Wow. So that's another story that needs fleshed out, but we have a lot on it already. And it was funny because we had to convince the guy to bring it, and he wasn't going to bring it, and he said, maybe next week, and I said, I'm leaving on Sunday, it's got to be tomorrow.
And this is the guy that found this?
Yeah.
Okay.
So we thought it was over. We thought it was done for. So it's Saturday morning, Doug calls me at the hotel, he said, get ready, he's bringing the medallion.
Oh boy.
And I'm like, okay, I'll be right over. I get there, Rick Lagina's on his phone to Prometheus saying, we got a medallion coming here, you got to bring a crew down, because they were all gone. They worked 50, 60 hours, they all go to the beach. So they were giving him a no answer, so he hands me his phone. He said, Jim, you talk to him. So I was trying to tell him that this is significant for all of Nova Scotia. And the guy said, I'm telling Jim, I couldn't even get a crew. It'd probably take me 4 hours to get a skeleton crew together. This guy's not going to wait that long. You guys you just need to do it. So the only photos of the whole war room meeting are this one and about 4 or 5 other ones. But I just was given the medallion, and he slid it on a piece of paper. I'm taking that photo that you see right there, and then I slid it down to Rick and Doug, and they had I believe a pair of calipers, and they were checking it all out and everything. So that's my version of the Phipps story, is that he was a treasure hunter. That's what he did for a living. Right. Just like Gary Drayton, you know.
So a lot of these stories, they actually can fit together that we keep hearing about every week.
Yep.
You know, but you have a way of sorting it out. Not a depositor, he's a searcher. He could have dug some of those tunnels for that matter, right?
Yeah, and why would he write that they were searching for plunder underground if he was actually planning plunder underground, you know? So anyway, then our last show, it was so great. We had Carmen Legg as a guest on Zoom, and it was such an enjoyable show. And I was anxious to ask him about this Scottish horseshoe. Now you'll see on this slide up in the top right, he had estimated that as being from 1610 and being Scottish based on some design feature of it. And then I asked him, I said, have you ever found any other Scottish, or can you tell me if you found any other Scottish items? And he goes, not till the season's over. We got big smiles on our face, so we haven't heard anything. But he said that later on, he said, I remember a couple other Scottish items, they ranged from 1610 to 1635. Okay. So we're just like chomping at the bit on this. So we decided that we'd put together some of the, on this slide right here, we'd put together some of the 16 things that dated in the 1600s.
Right,
now,
right from
there's
them.
many more of these, but these are the most critical ones in my mind. In addition to the ox shoe, we have a chunk of axe-cut wood that they found at depth near the money pit. Now, I mean like 90 foot down. Mm-hmm. And there's no saw marks on it. So it's all cut with an axe or an as, I think that's how they pronounce it. And it dated as old as 1626. So that could easily fit the 1632 theory. Then they were in the swamp, and Gary actually found this wooden T-square. He couldn't detect it because he had a metal detector, not a wooden T-square detector. But they sent it out for dating, and when Craig came back and gave it on the screen there, 1632, and everybody's like looking at each other like, whoa, you know, and I am too, you know.
Let's go.
But other items, they found two shoes down on a sunken pier, and because of the peg construction, they know they were made before 1700, which means 1600. These scissors were found on the Smith's Cove, and they were dated in around 1960 as being at least 350 years old. So that puts them right on the edge of 1600.
Right.
These two human bones dated from about mid-1600 to mid-1700. And these stakes are really interesting. Fred Dolan found, I believe, 60 of them in the swamp. They were all identical. They were 30 inches long. They weren't sharpened at the edge. They were a peg with a 2-inch round, you know, circular bottom to them. And he sent one of them out, 1700 plus or minus 80 years. So again, that puts it into our range of basically the Alexanders were back there till 1654. So the real range is from 1621 when he got to
it's about 37
Nova
years,
Scotia to 1654 when the Alexanders finally left. After that, it was a no man's land, a lot of fighting between the French and the English, etc. So these are, again, are just a few, but these are some of the highlights.
Now, Jim, 2 weeks ago, not this week, but last week, I think it was, did they not find a handle of some scissors that dated back to the 1600s?
Well, they said that they thought they went back even further than these ones.
Okay.
And also, they've mentioned a few times that one of those holes they're digging, that they think that's from the 1600s based on some...
Right, last night they were talking about
a type of pottery or something.
Yeah.
So Carmen said he sees 5 distinct time periods. 2 of them are after the money pit was discovered, so they don't really count for these purposes. One was 1600, and he said there's a lot of stuff from the 1600s. One was, I believe, the 1400s.
Right, real early. Yeah.
And then for the time of the Templars, he said, I've never found anything that I can verify would be Templar, but there are items and research that other people feel that they were there. But so the thing that he has the most evidence for, and the thing that Oak Island people have the most evidence for, is the 1600s.
Okay.
So we're down to the last slide here, and this cross on the number 1 that's on the left, that is the lead cross from Oak Island. Well, right around the same time that was found, this number 2 cross was found over in New Brunswick, which at the time was part of Nova Scotia back in the 1600s.
Right.
And they dated that based on the structure it was in to the 1600s. A while back, maybe a month or 3 weeks ago or whatever, we were contacted by a lady that used to live in Enfield, Nova Scotia, which is halfway between Halifax and Truro, which the Truro Company was one of the first diggers on Oak Island. And her father had a collection. Her name was Dawn Tidgewell. And her father had a collection of a family crest and a family book and all that. And in that collection, he had a cross. This is a simulation based on the Oak Island cross. That's not the cross she saw, but she sent it to us because she showed how the arm was broken.
Okay.
The right-hand arm was broken right there. And they had no idea. They got into their father's stuff, apparently, and they didn't know what it was. And she said it looked like soapstone. So they took it out in the driveway and scratched it in the gravel, and it was lead underneath.
Okay.
So it was another lead cross found in Nova Scotia at Enfield. So Doc went and looked for lead crosses, and he found a lot more than even what shows here, but 4, 5, and 6. There's 6 different crosses there. Well, Carman had said his theory was that the digging on Oak Island had something to do with burying people that were dying from typhus.
Right. They were typhus.
And they would bury them with their belongings. And then he commented that if they were buried in limestone, that eventually, through 100 years or whatever water circulating, it could eat away at leather, at canvas, at parchment, at human bones. And that could be why because they don't look like a recognizable part of a body, but they know they're bones. And by the way, Rick actually told me that they found 6 of them, but they were concerned about digging up a burial ground, and they wanted to know more about what they were doing before they dug any further. So, so those dated back to the 1600s. Those bones, but these crosses were found at burials of people with the plague. And so what we found out was that it was very common to make yourself a homemade, handmade lead cross.
You take a piece of limestone, you carve grooves into it, and then you pour your lead into there.
Yeah. And generally people were doing it when they were about to die, or they knew they were going to die, or their friend died and they wanted to bury the cross with them. So I got to thinking after that if, they saw that cross similar to the Oak Island cross carved on a stone in a prison, dome prison. Well, if you were a prisoner and you knew you were going to die and you don't have any lead to make yourself a cross, pull one of your teeth out and you carve the same cross right in the wall, so it's still going to be there. Because it was a big deal, especially like for Templars. A Templar cross, the real ones, had a point on them. Before they went into battle, they'd stick that cross in the ground. They'd go into battle. If they lived, they'd come back and get their cross. If they didn't, there was a cross there to mark their grave. So we literally think that these are basically like a poor man's grave marker.
And where I was going to go with that is they said that actually prisoners would make these in prison in their spare time as well.
Yeah.
And you had a suggestion that how is it possible some of the lead could be connected to other artifacts there? So why don't you add to that? I thought that was pretty interesting.
France and England had been at war a long time. There was actually one war called the 100 Years' War. And what was the French people shooting at the English? Lead. So most of the shells for muskets were made out of already expended lead. They'd take it and they'd melt it down and make new round. And so we think that some of these crosses may have been made from lead that was collected in the battlefields. And so, we're not trying to make up history, but we're trying to explain it in a scenario that could make sense. Most of them do, but some of them could be argued with. And, I think I mentioned this maybe in an earlier show, but the kind of work we're doing is not readily accepted by the mainstream, and that's the same way it is with science. Most of the advances in science were made by individuals or small teams, and you can't be peer-reviewed, because if your peers already knew what you were writing in your report, then it wouldn't be new. It's just logical. So you're on the cutting edge of new information, passing it on, and you do get pushback. I've gotten a lot of pushback or just ignored on major items, but even to the degree of that map about Mahone Bay once being Merlegash, I talked to the person who's supposed to be the expert on all maps of Nova Scotia, and we argued back and forth, and I told her, she said she just couldn't buy it, and I said, then how do you explain a map from 1684 with the names Merlegash on it 3 times right in Mahone Bay? Did somebody way back then in 1684 make up a map just to fool us today?
Yeah.
So we're looking at primary sources and actual documents and actual
books in Latin, books
deeds.
in French.
French, yeah. We've even had a couple deeds translated to understand them better. And we're not saying that we're 100% right on it all, but we're saying that we are digging down into the weeds at least as far as anybody, but we believe further. And that's the whole purpose of this show, is that we want to pass this information on to you. You folks out there have already sent us some good stuff.
Right.
Maybe it'll be a team effort here.
Right. You know, and as far as these lead crosses, you know, somebody might be watching and say, well, somebody may have worn that around their neck. Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
They may have used it for religious purposes, or they were a monk or whatever. But we also did find connections to the typhoid, and that they would use these part of the burial. So we'll keep digging, you keep digging, and please keep the comments coming. Jim, I think we're almost done.
Yes, thank you for being here. And like Doc said, keep the comments coming, because obviously they've generated a lot of information right here, and that's what we're all about, is passing on information.
All right. Well, we look forward to seeing all of you in the new year. I can't believe this is December. And thanks for watching, and please hit that subscribe button. We would appreciate it. And go to our website and to our Facebook page as well. I'm Doc Hamels. We'll see you next year.
And Jim McQuiston, Merry Christmas. See you next year.
Happy New Year.
This is Robert Clotworthy, and you have been listening to Oak Island Plus, a discussion of Oak Island and other mysteries from around the world. Be sure to catch every episode.